special guest with us tonight, and we should all say a very big, warm welcome to Aleksander Czeszkiewicz.
Hello, and thanks for having me on.
I've still got you muted. Sorry, mate. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. And hello, everyone, and thanks for having me on.
As the music was playing, I suddenly remembered and mentioned to Matt that I'd forgotten to ask you how to pronounce your surname. So how did I do?
That's no problem. It's Czeszkiewicz.
So you emphasize the middle part, the K. Czeszkiewicz.
Yes, you can. Czeszkiewicz.
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 Czeszkiewicz. Excellent. Fantastic. How are you, Aleksander?
I'm fine, thank you. And I'm into this conversation. I can't wait.
Yeah, and thanks for doing this at such short notice. We've been struggling to fill this slot for about a month, and all of a sudden we had a coming together. I think partly because of La Flemme?
Yes, I was searching for some podcasts to appear on because I was mostly focused on sharing my work in Poland, and now I'm on a mission to go also abroad because I have everything in English too, my book, my social media, and everything. So yes, partially because of Michael. And a little additional side note, now I'm publishing Michael's book Visions of Atlantis here in Polish.
Oh, wow. Okay. Cool. Yeah, it was quite I was just browsing Amazon one day, and because of the way algorithms work, Amazon knows previous books that I've bought, and Michael's book was suggested to me by Amazon, and I just took a chance. I didn't know Michael, wasn't familiar with the book, and really enjoyed it. So and then of course we got him on the podcast, which was great, and now we have you. So tell us a bit about yourself, Aleksander, and how you've ended up on this path.
Oh, it was a long journey. Now I'm 22 years old, but it started years ago. I'm still young, and I actually wrote this first book, Déjà.
We've just got an audio problem again for some reason here, Aleksander.
But mine audio? Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
What a pain in the ass. Let me just do the old plug and
We're going to have to do the
seconds just to
Now I can hear you
there
back.
we go. For some reason, every other week or every week, we have to remove the audio cable from the back of the roadcaster and put it back in, and then it makes the guest's audio come back.
Yeah. So just to recap, I was just asking you how you ended up going down this road, Aleksander, and tell us a bit about yourself.
Yes, it was a long journey. I'm still 22 years old, so I'm a bit young. And it started when I was about 15, 16 years old. I wrote this first book, Déjà Vu, has everything already been firstly in Polish, just at the age of 17. I always mention that because plenty of people really are wow. However, for me, it was actually a casual thing. Then I translated it into English, and my journey started actually with historical competitions. I used to be a good student, I attended historical competitions, and because of that, I had to learn history from the early beginnings, prehistory, hominids, what was before written history, up until the modern point. And because of these competitions and because of lots and lots of learning, I started questioning things. How do we know this is how our history really happened in such a way? How do we know this is true and this is false? How do we know that this was the evolution, the progress of humanity from hunter-gatherers up until the first civilizations and so on and so on. And I started questioning things. And when I learned from biology, from genetics, that anatomically modern humans appeared about 200,000 years ago, and when it comes to our history, it only started about 7 to 6,000 years ago, I saw a huge potential and what I call lost history of humanity. Because what was happening before let's say 5,000 years BC, 10,000 years BC, we see a huge gap in our history, 200,000 years. And first civilizations appeared about 4,000 to 3,000 years BC, so about 6 to 5,000 years ago. And then I started digging deeper and deeper, and these investigations led me to writing my book and doing what I'm doing. And then this history was an initial start of the research altogether, because I've branched out not only to history, but also to actually the biggest mysteries of the universe. Because if I've seen that there is a huge potential when it comes to our past, what potential lies when it comes to our universe, when it comes to everything that exists there. I've actually started seeing how little do we as humanity know, because we see all of the advancements, we see huge leaps forward being made every time, all the time. However, these are just illusions, and when it comes to the entire universe, when it comes to our past, we actually do not know much.
That's a very good summation, and I can't remember where I heard it, but you raised the point of anatomically modern humans being around for 200,000 years, and this keeps getting pushed back as well.
Yes.
I think, you know, some guys, some anthropologists are saying 250, 300,000 years now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. It was a few years ago when I was writing and when I was researching my book. It was 200,000 years ago, and I think from about last year or somewhere there, it was pushed back to at least 350,000, so 60% more. And then even if you check out Wikipedia, it says that maybe we can even push back the roots of anatomically modern humans somewhere 500,000 years ago. So conservatively, 315,000 still.
Yeah, and we only have written records for 5,500, 6,000 years maybe.
Yes,
which is such a small percentage of our story, our collective history, and it just begs the question: what on earth were we doing for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years without seemingly achieving anything, without making a fire, without building anything out of stone, just waddling around in the mud until all of a sudden there's this explosion in Sumeria and Egypt, and all of a sudden, that's when real history starts. I mean,
exactly.
Are you a follower of? Oh well, I know what I was going to say. Do you think that we have had previous civilizations which have reached substantial peaks and then been reset?
I would start with this potential, that there is a huge potential for actually many of advanced civilizations, even when it comes to human history. But let's imagine maybe there was someone even before us, before our species, another species that reached, let's say, intelligence and advancement level that was enough for starting culture, civilization. I see a huge potential when it comes to all of this, and that's why actually I'm into the lost civilization stuff, and I believe that there was something before the first civilizations, because even the first civilizations, the ancient Sumer, ancient Egypt, ancient India, these civilizations weren't considering themselves to be either the first, but they either considered to be much older or to be the descendants of some previous cultures, civilizations lost to our history. So when I've seen that, now I have huge confidence that there was something. Maybe, it wasn't advanced like Star Wars level of technology. However, there was something that was at least of the level of ancient Sumer, ancient Egypt before these first civilizations.
That's a great point. These early human civilizations, to use that word, crop up in the Bronze Age. But these ancient civilizations talk of a previous Silver Age and Golden Age, and you wonder why. Why would these ancient early ancestors refer back to times when things were better? Why would they do that? When you think of the modern era, we consider ourselves so progressive and forward-looking, and things have never been better. But our ancestors are looking backwards with reverence and awe, and that's an interesting perspective.
Yes, exactly. It is one of the actual topics of my book because my book isn't called In Search of Ancient Civilizations or Lost Civilizations, but it is called Déjà Vu Has Everything Already Been, which refers to actual cyclicality of time. And I will get into that in a moment. However, you are right that it maybe wasn't only about that before that there was something better. It is one part of the story. However, another part of the story is that actually everything is cyclical. There are ups and downs, and just as we know, plenty of civilizations like ancient Rome, ancient Greece, who reached their peak and then lost and fell forever. Our ancient ancestors were thinking that this is natural thing and everything is cyclical. And of course it was a little bit of primitive thought because even when it comes to seasons, even primitive people can see that there are seasons to nature, so maybe everything is cyclical when seasons are cyclical. However, I believe it is beyond that. In my book I also research physics of cyclical time when it comes to both time and in the entire universe, that maybe everything in the universe is cyclical. And when it comes to our ancient ancestors, you mentioned it really right that there are different ages like Bronze Age, Silver Age, Age of Heroes, Golden Age, and this is a really common theme, at least in the Eastern, Middle Eastern, and our European part of civilization. Also, when it comes to Mesoamerican civilization, these civilizations thought that there are different ages, that it isn't because nowadays we may think being limited a bit by our modern world and egoistical thinking that okay, so if we are living in bad age, everything is bad and so on. No, these were not only that this age is worse, this age is better. It is that these ages are different and there are benefits and negatives in each of these ages. At one age it is all about spirituality, however at the other age it is all about materialism, and it is all the balance. And when it comes to the entire cycle, one cycle or more cycles, everything is balanced, and it is a balance between both spirituality and materialism, both between life and death, and so on and so on.
Yeah, you mentioned the spiritual age and the material age. The Rosicrucians would call that Luciferic and Ahrimanic, that we live in the age of Ahriman right now, where a society is driven towards logical thinking, materialism, managerial, technocratic, these sorts of systems, at the expense of spiritual thought and pursuits. And they would argue that you need both. You need to have a balance between both. That's why they have this symbol of a clenched fist, which is the condensed, the material, the physical, and an open hand, which is the open spiritual woo-woo. And you put these things together to kind of show that you're trying to encapsulate balance between these two kind of polar opposite aspects.
Yes, yes, I agree. And actually, when it comes to these cyclical ages, for instance, in Hinduism, the famous yoga cycle is a little bit about what you've mentioned, that there are different ages. There are 4 ages for yugas. And during the golden age, the dharma, the spirituality is full, so 100% about. Of course, it isn't like only white and only black. It is like yin yang. Even when it comes to this full spiritual age, there are still some dark parts, which are of course natural things. Nothing is that distinguishable. However, it is described in a very interesting way that during the Satya or Krita Yuga, depending on the text, so this best age, the Dharma is full, 100%, and the Dharma is what is right. What Greeks, Platonists, and even earlier, later Hermeticists, Gnosticists were talking about necessity. We, I think, in modern age lack necessity. As you mentioned, we are focusing on the Luciferian part or on the intellectual part. We think that when it comes to making choices, let's say we have to choose between two things, we need to list all the ups and downs of each one, and then logically we can choose what is the best for us. But actually, when it comes to the universe, reality at a bigger level, bigger picture, it isn't true. It is about that this route will be right because you don't know what will be later on. And you're now comparing things that you know about now when taking a decision. And I think that nowadays we lack this necessity, this dharma, choosing what is right, going beyond ideologies, going beyond our logical, rational thinking, and choosing, okay, spirituality from a bigger picture, this is right, I will take this. Maybe my ideology and my rational mind thinks different, but maybe this is the right thing. And these yugas are described that during the Krita Satya Yuga, there is this full dharma according to Mahabharata. Now I'm mentioning the yugas according to Mahabharata because later there were different interpretations of the yugas, of course. But in the Mahabharata, which is one of the oldest and at the same time the longest ancient text we have and that is still intact, there is this, as I mentioned, 4 yugas, the full one, and then each yuga goes 1/4 less dharma. So there is the Treta Yuga, which is 3/4 of the dharma. Then there is Dvapara Yuga, which is half, and then there is the famous Kali Yuga, in which there is only 1/4 quarter of the dharma. However, in these yuga systems, when it comes to Mahabharata, there is a mention that it isn't bad. It is just natural that these yugas happen in that way, and it doesn't mean that if the dharma in the Kali Yuga is quarter, it is all bad and everything. No. It all depends on us, on our actions, and how we will live by. But these are global trends. We can compare it to astrology when there are some global energies that are maybe manipulating things. Maybe they are making things and taking them into a direction that they are taken in, etc. But it all depends on us. So it isn't all doom and all hell during the Kali Yuga. However, I would say archetypes or global energies will be said that there is only about a quarter of the dharma, and then it comes back, but in the reverse order. So back to Dvapara Yuga, so half dharma, 3/4 of the dharma, and then full dharma, and so on and so on.
Yes, very interesting. You've talked about this concept of well, you haven't yet, but you teased us. So you're going to talk about this concept of cyclical time. So I'd like to get your opinion on what that means and how it affects history and the sort of the historical record.
Yes, actually, in one of the last chapters of my book, I'm mentioning all the things connected with cyclicality, and I was shocked. It was, I would say, a little bit of synchronicity because I had the title "Déjà Vu Has Everything Already Been," because I didn't have the knowledge about cyclical and I wasn't that much into it at that time. But I said, okay, lost civilizations, there were peaks and ups and downs, so okay, déjà vu has everything already been. But when I was finishing my book, I actually it all came to me, this research about cyclical time, and I even found a few examples of our history being repeatable, that our history is repeating, that everything may be according to these yuga cycles, but also to, for instance, astrological zodiacal ages. And I found out that it isn't about some beliefs of primitive people that, okay, let's say this yuga lasts for 2000 years, this yuga lasts for this, and so on. No, most of these systems of cyclical time, either Hindu yugas or the zodiacal ages of the Middle East and Europe, these are based on true astronomical phenomena. And these phenomena are connected with the precession of the equinoxes because there is an astronomical cycle, and each cycle we see different zodiacal constellations, zodiacal signs on the heavens above us. So during one cycle we see, let's say, Aquarius, and on the other we see, for instance, Aries, and so on and so on. These astrological this actually zodiacal symbols are of course man-made, that, oh, this looks like an Aries, so we can call them whatever we want, but this change of these zodiac signs showing up on above us, these are actually connected to true astronomical phenomena. So this out there, it isn't some man-made things imagined and invented by humans. No, these are true astronomical phenomena. Invented thing is it Aries or is it another cluster of stars, of course? And I found out that according to these zodiacal epochs, the great year being, so the full cycle being about 26,000 years, to be exact 25,920 years, I found out a few examples that our history repeated during these cycles. So if we have full cycle of 25,920 years and divide it, let's say, into 12 zodiac sign, each zodiac sign will take about 2,160 years. And I found out that, for instance, Roman history and a large, significant part of Roman history was repeated during the next zodiacal epoch, exactly 2,160 years ago. And it isn't an example of, let's say, a single battle being exactly 2,160 years ago repeated during the next cycle. No, it was about history being repeated. So a period of, let's say, about 70 to 90 years, depending on how we think of it and how accurate we want to be. A period between 70 to 90 years being repeated during the next zodiac cycle. And it is exactly, let's say that at the beginning of this cycle, there was a war. So during the next zodiacal epoch, 2,160 years ago, plus or minus a few months, not even a few years, but a few months, we see that, okay, there was another war. But there it was ancient Rome, and here we've got not modern, but modern USA, meaning 19th century USA. We see that it was okay, the war happened. We see that, for instance, people who were rulers during these different epochs were similar to each other, were looking similar, which may be, of course, a coincidence. However, were having similar character traits. I compare because during this repeated history, there appears to be Hannibal, so the ancient Carthage ruler who invaded Rome, and Hitler. And there are plenty of very, very specific things about these two guys that are very, very similar and may point that maybe not Hitler reincarnated, so maybe not Hannibal reincarnated later as Hitler, but maybe some energies were at work and shaped such a figure like Hannibal later as Hitler. And we see, for instance, that then during a time, because this we are talking about in ancient Rome Punic Wars, and then we are talking about 19th and early 20th century USA. We see, of course, different history, different reality, different global powers, different countries, different technology. However, we're saying, okay, war started and ended at the exact same moments during the next cycle. Similar people were governing these wars. Similar, let's say, things were happening maybe afterward. There was, for instance, arms race between two countries that were similar later. And I found out it isn't my own thing that I invented it. I found out by many other researchers, and I connected, of course, the dots. However, I found out that there is a repeated period of about 70 to 90 years that happened exactly during the next zodiacal cycle, and I was shocked about that. I then found out that there are maybe not that significant, but little smaller examples, like one event happening exactly in the half of the next zodiacal age, etc., etc. However, I think that, and I started digging more and more, and I found that some historical things are happening during the next zodiacal cycles similarly. Maybe, of course, not exactly the same, because it is impossible. It would be stupid if everything was repeating. So I am sitting with you 2160 years ago and having the same conversation. Of course not. However, similar, I would say, energies, maybe when it comes to spiritual understanding of it, similar archetypes are working and are making these things repeatable. And I would say that this is the best hard evidence for some kind of maybe reincarnation or karma at works. Because if it happens again, if similar people are there, if similar events are there, maybe it is connected to some kind of karma, of problems of humanity, of bad actions that happened during the previous cycle that needed to be repeated in the next. And maybe even, as I said, maybe it was Hannibal reincarnating as Hitler in the next cycle, but maybe it was just a personality being shaped by some universal laws that are beyond us.
The historical comparison between the Roman Republic and 20th century America is an interesting one, because when Rome defeats Hannibal and the Carthaginians, they solidify Sicily and take over the known world. And after the Americans come into World War II, defeat the Nazis, although, you know, the Soviets would say we had a big hand in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The US goes on to dominate the known world to this day. So that's an interesting comparison.
Yes, yes, there are plenty of more details. I want to search in my book for some quotes because it goes into that, for instance, a period of 15 years within this cycle, it happens all over again that during the times that Rome is, getting bigger and bigger and going from the Republic into later, of course, Empire. At the same time, United States before the First World War, I think it was 1896 or something, is again doing the same thing. So as you mentioned, there are plenty of more detailed things. I wanted to just keep the entire picture of how it works, but I was actually amazed by this example. There are a few, as I said, more minor ones, not that strong as this one. However, I think that if we dig deeper and deeper, and I tried and I have some sketches of possibilities of more examples of repeated history, that then we can see that there is more to our reality, even not history, than just, linear progress. And even coming back to thinking about cyclical time, as you mentioned, we nowadays think of it as only progress. Even science shows us that it was from the hominids through first humanoid beings, then through, let's say, cavemen, up until the first cities, civilizations, and so on and so on. However, even if we think deeper about our known history of the last these 5 to 6 to 7,000 years, we see that, for instance, Middle Ages, Dark Ages, were called dark because it was a huge regress from the ancient times, from even the times of ancient Rome. It was a huge dip. And I would say maybe, not only technology, but also in how humans behaved and the conditions of living on of plenty of humans. It was a big dip that then started to coming back to progress in the times of the Columbus, of the discoveries, of the Renaissance, and then so on and on and on. And I think that this is a good example that it isn't that our history is always linear, that we just think from the modern perspective, technology is going forward. We see that, from the First or Second World War, we made huge leaps when it comes to plenty of areas of our lives. However, as you mentioned, even there are different, I would say, models of understanding our past. We have this constant progress one, that it is the global and dominating one. However, for instance, during the Middle Ages, in Christian-based countries, it was the other way round, because it was the fall from the Garden of Eden, constant regress, because we had the original sin and it was all the slope down, and then maybe at the end there would be salvation and we will go up again. However, it was downfall of humanity according to this vision, and I think such visions are really dominating our lives and can, make us into different ways, can shape our global society and shape us as humanity in, of course, good and bad ways. Because even when it comes to the modern vision of constant progress, there are, of course, upsides of going into more greedy, etc., etc. And the cyclical model, the third one, because we have up one, downwards one, but the cyclical model is a bit natural one, because there are ups and downs. It is neutral, harmonic, etc.
It seems to me that one of the physical mechanisms at work here, you mentioned precession of the equinox, the long count astronomical cycle, and I'm wondering if this has an impact on climate, because you mentioned the Dark Ages there, and from what we can tell, we had the Roman warm period where the Mediterranean area at least was warmer. You could grow wine grapes in England. And we, as a species, do better when it's warmer. Whereas at the Dark Ages, it seems like there may have been a downturn in climate that leads to poor crop yields, which leads to famine, lowered immune system, and then diseases, opportunistic diseases. So I'm wondering if your cycle, your astronomical cycle, is having a direct impact on our climate cycle, causing these events.
Yes, that's a good point. Even now, I'm living in Poland near the Baltic Sea, and there was a point a little bit after the Middle Ages, Dark Ages, that the Baltic Sea was non-navigable in winter, and it was all covered in ice. That you could travel through the ice sheet from here, from Poland, up until the countries in the Scandinavia. And yes, I think that it is connected. Even looking at a bigger picture, bigger cycles. We see that, for instance, ice ages were cyclical. They were starting, they were, of course, accumulating, and then they were coming back, and then they were finishing. And when we are talking about the ice ages in connection to lost civilizations, of course, another synchronicity is that the last ice age that we know happened to end during the exact same times that Plato, for instance, is describing Atlantis to sing. So, yes, so this is another thread that we may continue.
And Plato claims that the story came from the Egyptian priest class, that they had records of it. Plato's ancestor, Solon. Solon, wasn't it? Yeah. Apparently, Solon passed the story down to Plato and his mates. And it's a hell of a coincidence, isn't it, that he gives a date which modern science has sort of confirmed where there would have been a massive flood.
Yes, exactly. This is one of the coincidences, and I started researching because, as I mentioned, I grew up with, I would say, mainstream narrative when it comes to science. I was always into science. My mom was actually a historian at the time. My father was an engineer, so at home I had plenty of books. And, when I was alone at home or I was bored, so I was skimming these books and going through, looking at the pictures when I was young. And I would say that I was progressively going forward and forward. I started with the mainstream one, and then I was just opened to more possibilities, and I was searching. I mentioned the fact that ancient ancestors who were, of course, closer to those prehistoric eras than we are, were telling us different story. So I thought to myself, they were closer to this time, so maybe they are more accurate when it comes to these very, very ancient times. And the same when it comes to Plato. I started, okay, there is this Plato story of Atlantis, which is, of course, by the mainstream considered to be a total fiction and just an allegory of a perfect country, perfect state, and their downfall, and that they were, of course, destroyed partially. They fought Athenians, and Athenians were better, and then it led to their downfall because of their moral things. They were bad morally, etc., etc. And I thought, okay, but let's check what Plato is actually saying when it comes to the Atlantis story. So I went into the true text, of course, the translation from Greek first in Polish, then from Greek to English, and I was looking for the facts. You mentioned Solon, and I thought to myself, okay, Plato is telling us that he didn't invent the story of Atlantis, but it was Solon during his voyages to Egypt. Then even historically, I checked out, there are at least two big historians who are telling us that Solon truly went to Egypt. Plutarch and Herodotus both tell us that yes, Solon was most probably traveling to Egypt. So then I would say, wait, this is historically accurate. So let's go further and further. Solon heard at a city called Sais from Egyptian priests the story that, oh, you Greeks are like children. Your history is not that old, but we in Egypt, our history goes long, far, far away back. And it is a similar situation to us nowadays, that our history goes back to, let's say, these 7,000 years. And then there may be older history. So the same was with Egypt and Greece. The Greeks were ignorant of a much older history. They were like children. And then at the city of Sais, these priests told Solon that, yeah, about 9,000 years before their meeting, there was this Atlantis civilization. And even later, other people from ancient Greece were coming. I think it was Crantor, another philosopher, after, of course, Plato, who went to Egypt, to Sais, and then he reportedly saw the inscriptions and the pillars that had engraved in them the story of Atlantis. And I say, okay, it is historically accurate. Okay, maybe Plato added something to this story, but the core of the story and the source of the story is really, really probable to be from ancient Egypt. Even I mentioned that the first civilizations and within this ancient Egypt were telling us of an older history. And when I said that there are plenty of sources, lists of kings and many other ones that are telling us from ancient Egypt, of course, that their history is 36,000 years before the first pharaohs. So I mentioned, yeah, 9,000 years according to Solon could be heard at the city of Sais at those times if ancient Egyptians believed their history was much older. So I see that it is very probable that the core of the Atlantis story was a true memory, first given to Solon, then given to Plato, and that maybe Plato added something, of course, but maybe he accurately represented plenty of data. Then I went further and further. For instance, he mentions that Atlantis was an island that was beyond the Hercules pillars, so beyond the Straits of Gibraltar. And okay, maybe he imagined that, okay, maybe there's an infinite ocean there because ancient Greeks had no knowledge of Americas, for instance. So maybe he imagined that such an island should be outside of the Mediterranean Ocean. However, he says that there was the Straits of Gibraltar, which connect, of course, the Mediterranean Sea with the Atlantic Ocean. And then there was the Atlantis Island. And then beyond Atlantis Island, there was a huge continent surrounding it. And I said, wait a second, if we switch the map to the side and take a look, if we were sailing off the Mediterranean into the Atlantic Ocean, we will see that the continents of Americas, North America, South America, and Middle America, are making this huge surrounding continent that surrounds this Atlantic Ocean. So I was, wait a second, this is accurate representation of geography that was beyond the knowledge of the Greeks. We know very well that the Greeks at the times of Plato or before that or even after that had no knowledge of America. So I said, okay, there is a huge probability historically when it comes to the source of Atlantis story, this ancient Egyptian tale told to Solon, then there are details that are accurate geographical details that are beyond the knowledge of the people who transmitted this story, so Solon, Plato, etc. And I thought to myself, well, I think this is the best evidence that at least large part of the Plato's story is based on true facts. And then we can add any type of connections beyond, of course, the source and history, like other mentions in other civilizations of similar, like Aztlan in the Aztec lands, also called by them the primeval island from which the people came to Mesoamerica. And then you can connect more and more dots.
Oh God, my mind just went completely blank. Then I was going to ask something. Oh, Younger Dryas. That's what I was going to say. Do you think it's probable that whatever civilizations existed that we've forgotten about were wiped out by some sort of cosmic impact, often known as the Younger Dryas impact?
Yes, just as I started from the basics and then I expanded my knowledge when it comes to Atlantis, I will try to do the same when it comes to the catastrophe or the times of the Younger Dryas, the ending of the last ice age. So Plato gives us 9,000 years before Solon, which is 9,600 years ago, and within similar dates from about 14,000 years ago up until about 11,000 years ago. So within these frames, the last ice age ended. And I found plenty of geological facts about this age that really blew my mind, especially as I live near coast of the Baltic Sea, and I see plenty of people telling, and in media there are plenty of ads telling us that, oh, 2 centimeters in the sea level rise would destroy most of the lands and of the cities here. So when I actually learned that from the times of the last ice age, so the ice age, there were huge ice caps all over the world, it was called, and then the ice age was ending, so of course most of the glaciers melted up until nowadays. We have a few glaciers on the northernmost part and southernmost part of the earth, and of course in the high mountains. I found out that from the ending of the last ice age, a little bit before Plato is telling us Atlantis sank, up until nowadays, the sea levels rose 120 meters, even a little bit more, 120 meters. So I imagined being on the beach near my home, going to the beach, and 120 meters, which is a considerable skyscraper, maybe not one of these biggest ones, but a large multi-story building. And this was the rise of the sea levels. Imagine what happened to such an island like Atlantis. I thought that yes, it is very probable that such an island sank during the end of the last ice age. Another key detail and key fact from the end of the last ice age, there sank about 25 million square kilometers of land on the entire planet, which is the equivalent of the entire North America, not the USA, but entire North America from Alaska to Mexico, which is another key idea. Of course, it was an area of land all over the world, but imagine, let's say, a kilometer in most parts of the world of land was taken back by the sea because the glaciers were melting. And when it comes to, because as I mentioned, I go from the greatest facts and then into some things that are maybe more speculative, because plenty of theories about some kind of a catastrophe at the end of the last ice age, for instance, are not accepted by mainstream academia. So I started with the academic knowledge, which shows us that yes, there is a possibility of plenty of island civilizations or previous human cultures sinking. Even not civilizations, but plenty of, let's say, hypothetical cities at that time would sink if they were close to oceans and other bodies of water. So I say yes, there is a huge probability of the sinking of Atlantis. And then additional to that, there are plenty of theories that are showing us how this happened, because there are natural things about endings and beginnings of the last ice ages, and as we mentioned, probably it is about the cyclicality and some kind of astronomical phenomena. However, there are plenty of theories that are showing us that this change was much more rapid, because mainstream is telling us, okay, it was a few centimeters per year of change of the sea levels. But even if we think conservatively, imagine 2 centimeters each year being the sea levels rising. I imagine that it was the end of the last ice age, and maybe at some point huge parts of the glaciers were being chopped off the main one. And imagine huge part of ice being thrown into the ocean, and it could have led to huge mega waves, tsunamis. We see tsunamis nowadays are destroying huge parts of our civilization near the coastal regions. So I imagined, even if mainstream is telling us, no, it wasn't a catastrophe, but it was, let's say, a gradual change ending of the last ice age, still I think within this frame of thinking, it is possible that there was some kind of mega wave, tsunami, etc. But then there are more theories, of course, that it was, for instance, comet strike, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. But before the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, there were plenty of other theories about such a catastrophe. There are even some traces that this ending of the last ice age could have been led by some kind of solar activity. Just like solar winds, solar flare, intense solar activity could have led to the end of the last ice age, as much as it can lead to, for instance, new ice age coming right now or in the future. So there are plenty of different theories. I think that yes, there's the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. There are some evidence for that. There are some critics of it, but I think right now we need to dig deeper and deeper. And I think that something happened at the end of the last ice age. And I think that the sinking of Atlantis could have been a fact.
Yeah. Have you come across Mario Buildreps in your research?
I've heard of him, however, I haven't researched that much into his works.
No, it'd be worth a look, I think, for you. He's found a correlation between ancient monuments and their alignment to true north versus and correlating that to pole shift, and that the ancient buildings could be sort of plotting a course through time where the polar shift. And you mentioned we've got the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Robert Schoch is a fan of the solar flare, CME, but there's the third one that don't often get talked about is pole shift or polar rotation.
Yes, I'm mentioning it in my book too, and I've researched it. Maybe not the Marius one, however, I'm mentioning possibilities because there are different types even of pole shifts. It can, go a little bit in one way. It can be a pole reversal even. There are some kind of physical scenarios of that. And even when we think of a bigger picture, such a pole shift could have been created by the solar activity. It could have been led because highly accelerated particles that are hitting Earth when it comes to solar winds, solar flares, and such phenomena can lead to electromagnetic anomalies that can further lead into some kind of polar shifts or polar anomalies. So I think that, all of these theories are probable, and maybe, one was at the end of Younger Dryas, but maybe it was like one thing led to other thing, and then finally it led to the sinking of Atlantis. So it doesn't mean that because there are three theories, and I mentioned these three theories in my book, that they exclude each other. No, maybe two are correct in some sense.
Yes, these things can cascade as well.
Yes.
Like the Bronze Age collapse. Was it war? Was it famine? Was it mass migration? Was it climate change? It was all of them, all at once, happening at once. And these things can often trigger each other. So, yeah, I guess you just have to try and keep an open mind and keep looking for the sort of latest research and try and find what's the most sort of plausible hypothesis and try and run with that until proven differently.
Yes, I agree. And as I mentioned, I always go to the core, to what is really, really probable, like what is accepted academically, etc. Because then we see that even if we exclude the theories that we mentioned of solar flares, pole reversals, or the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, or any other celestial body hitting the Earth, we still see that there was some kind of sinking of lands during the end of the last ice age. So I think that that's enough to show us that there is a huge potential of being previous civilizations during the times that Plato is mentioning Atlantis. And whether it was, a huge civilization or just an island, or whether it was advanced this much or that much, it doesn't matter, but we go, because I say that the more I learn, the more books I read, the more I research, the more I see how little we know, how lots of things are theories and so on. And I see that we should go to the basics, and the Atlantis one is confirmed by the basics we know. There was the ending of the last ice age, it happened, it may lead to the sinking of Atlantis. We have, as for instance, Graham Hancock has his book called Fingerprints of the Gods. I do not say I found the ultimate evidence or I found Atlantis. I didn't, of course. However, I found, by looking at all the traces, these fingerprints that Hancock is alluding to, that we do not have solid evidence that 100% show us that, oh, this is the remains of Atlantis, but we have the fingerprints. The megaliths all over the world with similar architectural style of polygonal, gigantic cyclopean walls that are similar, whether we think of them in Asia, in South America, on the Easter Island, or in Europe and Egypt. For instance, fact that probably someone before Eratosthenes of Cyrene, so the first one who measured the Earth, had knowledge of the Earth, their dimension, and the lands that were on it, and so on and so on. These are these fingerprints, the texts that are telling us of the same time of the end of the Ice Age, during which some kind of civilization was lost to time. These are the fingerprints, and what I show is that these fingerprints are more than probable, but they soon can be turned to facts.
Where do you think Göbekli Tepe plays in this sort of human story? Is that like some people have described it as like a time capsule, and that it was buried on purpose before the catastrophe?
Yes, I think that there is something to this theory, and actually a large part of Göbekli Tepe is still undiscovered. We know from radars that it lies there underground, but we still haven't excavated it. So maybe there are much older parts than that, and maybe by digging them, we will see the entire picture. However, I would say that Göbekli Tepe was, of course, important to our history, because when the first, let's say, conspiracy theories. I don't like this saying, but let's say conspiracy theories about older history were popularized in the 70s or 80s of the previous century. The biggest argument of the skeptics was that we have no evidence of anyone, let's say at the times of Plato's Atlantis, being enough civilized to build buildings. It was one of the core arguments about the Sphinx being older theory, that maybe it is older, however, we have no evidence that people during the times of prehistory, of these times that Robert Shaw, for instance, calculated Sphinx to be, had the abilities to create megalithic constructions. But then in the 90s, I think 1994, the Göbekli Tepe was discovered. These are megaliths, maybe not huge like Baalbek ones, but still significant ones. They were dated. At least the times of their burial was dated to about 12,000 years ago, so similar time to Plato's Atlantis. And yes, it was evidence that people during these prehistorical times that Plato is telling us Atlantis existed in were able to make megalithic structures, constructions. So maybe they were also the builders of the pyramids or of the Sphinx or of other megaliths that we found all over the world that may be traces of some kind of pre-Diluvian culture. Pre-Diluvian meaning before the ending of the last ice age and huge meltings of the water that led to huge floodings. So the Göbekli Tepe was important in this case in our modern history to understand the entirety of history, and I think it was a little bit of paradigm shift. However, when it comes to Göbekli Tepe from a historical standpoint, I say that it is also part of these fingerprints, as Graham Hancock named them, because on Göbekli Tepe pillars and structures that we find there, we find similar symbols, similar carved things that we find in other places. In my book, I have a very funny and very interesting image that shows that, for instance, Göbekli Tepe people that are inscribed on Göbekli Tepe, humans, are similar to the Easter Islands one because they are holding their bellies. They are having these chins that are exaggerated a bit, and they are very tall, and their head is very tall, like this elongated head. So similar one can be found in Göbekli Tepe. Similar ones can be found, for instance, in South America, but also, of course, on the Easter Islands and in many other regions. You mentioned one symbol of this clenched fist, and I found similar symbols that are found in Göbekli Tepe and in many other isolated parts of the world. So I think, I don't know exactly what Göbekli Tepe was and how it plays a part. Maybe it was time capsule, maybe it was before the flood and some kind of mud waters actually covered it with mud, and that's how it was buried. However, I think it is part of the prehistoric puzzle that can decode the history of those previous lost civilizations.
Yeah. There's controversy at the moment because the academics want to stop. They want to stop excavating.
Yeah, yes, I've heard of it. Yes, and I think that it may be a little bit conspiratorial, that there is some conspiracy, not conspiracy, because plenty of people are telling us, oh, this is a conspiracy theory, etc. However, these are even not conspiracy theories, because in order to have a conspiracy theory, you need a conspiracy, that some people are conspiring to hide something, to change something, and so on. And I think here we are talking about some kind of conspiracy, that maybe these trees and lack of excavation because the trees were planted, it's not just random thing, oh, let's plant some trees, but maybe it was intentional to maybe postpone these discoveries when it comes to our most prehistoric pasts. And I'm telling that because plenty of people are, for instance, telling about things that we are talking today in this show, that, oh, these are conspiracy theories. But wait a second. For instance, in my case, did I talk to you about any kind of conspiracy to hide our history? No, not yet. But why people are telling us, oh, these are conspiracy theories? They do not understand that these theories are not at all conspiracy theories. So it's another thing to be worthy of pointing out.
Yeah, well, I think people have a terrible misconception of history. Was it Napoleon who said history is a set of lies agreed upon?
Yes, I have this quote in my book even.
Oh, right, nice. And who's the other quote? Oh, history is 10% facts, 90% opinion. You know,
I don't know who, but I've heard it, yes.
Yeah, it's I mean, one of the things we used to get taught was history is written by the victor. And people read history books and just think, well, that's what happened then, because it's here in a book. And people should be more skeptical, more open, more willing to question what they're led to believe by not just the academics, but by the TV and documentaries. You get these Netflix documentaries. You know, people watch Gladiator and think that there were sharks in the Colosseum.
There wasn't.
Yeah, and they had laser beams on the head. You know, I think it's good to have an open mind. Not so open that your brain falls out, but a relatively open mind, and being skeptical about what you read. Have you ever come across Oswald Spengler?
No, I haven't.
I think you'd like him because he was a historian, early 20th century. I think he was writing, just before World War One, around the time of World War One, and his big thesis was about cyclical history. I think you'd really enjoy it.
I need to check him out.
Yeah, Decline of the West was the book I read a couple of years ago by Oswald Spengler. It's heavy going, but really fascinating stuff. Alexander, we're rocking up to an hour already. This has been fascinating. What are you working on at the moment?
I'm working on to creating more stuff in English. I am planning future books, but I think right now I want to focus on more content creation because I used to create plenty of like YouTube videos in Polish, in English, but I had other things to do, and for the last 2 years I minimized this part of my work, and I think I want to come back. YouTube videos in English, especially going to podcasts like this and sharing things, because I've seen that in Polish there is people really love such topics, and I see that in English, of course, they love them too, and I want to make more and show people, as I mentioned, that I don't want to be Atlantis was 100% real and these are fools that do not believe in Atlantis. No, I want to show the possibilities, that there are plenty of things that we do not know about, that there are so many possibilities. So my plans for the nearest futures are more content and more, because we just here mentioned a peak of the iceberg. There is much more to understand our history holistically. That's what I'm doing. I'm not only, focusing on one part of the history. I want to see like the matrix code behind our reality. This is another part of my research. And I was researching a lot the sacred geometry stuff, solar system, universe, how it works. And my idea is to go to the basics, because we can measure things in space or here on Earth. However, what will the single measure lead us to? They won't tell us the entirety of the things. I think that by going to just metaphorically to the code of the matrix or just code of the game, we can be in a video game and measure this distance, that distance, but all of this will be illusory. And I think that we as humanity, and the next leap forward when it comes to science, paradigm shifts, will be decoding the source code and going to the basics. And then if you know the codes behind this reality, because it is to some extent coded, we have laws of physics, we have geometry in the cosmos, I think that then we can make the next huge leap forward in understanding everything.
What did Tesla say? If you want to understand the universe, think in terms of frequency and vibration. I think that's what he said. Well, this has been great, Alexander. Where can people follow you? Where should they go?
Anywhere they can type my name and surname, copy paste Aleksander Czeszkiewicz. You can find me on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and many other. My book is Déjà Vu, has everything already been. It is available on Amazons in the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and also a few more. So if you just type my name, copy paste my name and surname, you can find my social media and my book.
Fantastic.
Cool.
Ace. Well, this has been great. We should do it again and maybe, further down the line and talk more about the metaphysics and hyperdimensionality and the source code of the Matrix. That would be fabulous.
Yes.
It's been great fun.
Okay.
I'm in.
Excellent. Right. Well, the links are in the show notes, folks. I'm going to get the book.
Oh,
Sounds right up my alley.
doesn't it? Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, Alexander. Hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. For those of you watching along, we shall be back in 10-15 minutes to open the phone lines. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, nice to meet you, pal.
Thank you.
See you on the flip side.
Yeah.